This will probably be the most sentimental attachment someone ascribes to an email subscription service that you'll watch today. And if not, send me the link to that video. I will watch it. Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to a rambling discussion on, yes, the email subscription service I have a strange emotional attachment to, how I got into it, how it shaped the reader I am today and this channel, and why I had to put it aside. Now, quick thing here, this is not going to be some big readers beware call out post for poor business practices or whatever. I did not stop using this service because of big reveals of the business practices or whatever. It's literally just it served a purpose and that purpose is no longer served. So I want to make that clear here. I am not here to spread the drama and share the big news. Be clear. But I do want to do the video essayist thing and start with a only tangentially related topic and then connect it back. So, I was watching a Reads with Rachel video a while ago. We had once again had the usual discourse of book piracy come up and various people discussing the reasons for book piracy and what to do if books were inaccessible to you. And it was a whole thing. And one of the people that Reads with Rachel was talking about, I don't even remember their name, it's kind of embarrassing, but regardless, they have brought up a variety of ways in which a person could get free books to avoid having to pirate books. And it was funny to me because, yes, on the list, the person brought up a lot of things that were not accessible in the global south and were therefore not great options for getting free books. And Reads with Rachel was going through that list. She then brought up one part of the list, which was BookBub. And she questioned if that was even a thing that was real. And it was a surreal moment to me because BookBub has been a facet of my life for a decade. And I was like, everyone doesn't know about this? What? I did not know that technically BookBub is such a niche thing in reader spaces because it was so important to me for so long. So I've already mentioned it with her before. Rachel and I have spoken, but it was really funny to see this thing that I've again have such emotional attachment to was being brought up as a possible hoax. No shade, obviously, but let's jump into how that attachment formed in the first place. The year was 2012. I had only recently graduated from high school the year before in community college, and I had my first big girl job. I'd had a couple babysitting gigs and seasonal work, but this was my first regular retail year-round, have a schedule type setup, and I had all of this extra money that I did not have before because my family, we won't go too far into it, but we grew up on this distinctly less wealthy side. And I saved up my paychecks and I wanted one thing specifically. I spent $150 of one of my first paychecks on a Nook. Because that's how much of a hipster I am. I didn't even get the Kindle. I got the second option. And I loved that Nook. It was my primary source of reading for years. But the thing is, when you grow up distinctly less wealthy, you get some thoughts in your head that are very hard to shake. In fact, at 30, I am still having to work constantly to shake them. And that $150 that I spent was the most amount I had ever spent on a single product in my life. And it might sound obscene that a Nook or any e-reader would be that much today, but this was back in 2012, 2013, the era when e-readers and ebooks in general were still considered a new fad. People were still writing like tech articles on how it was all gonna flame out because smartphones had not quite become ubiquitous. They were around and they were very clearly a cultural facet. However, it was still very much in the you had to have a certain amount of money. It wasn't quite the given that everyone had one at this time. So I didn't know a lot of other people that were reading ebooks, didn't really have a lot of access, but I knew they were supposed to be cheaper than regular books. However, they were still kind of too expensive for me. Keep in mind, distinctly less wealthy and distinctly less wealthy trauma brain. I had grown up using the library and thrift stores for my books, where the most I would spend would be like maybe $8, and even that is on the high side for thrift stores. These books, then the e-reader, as I tried to look for them, were $10 to $15. So that was still a little bit too much for my brain. So I took to a lot of those Project Gutenberg sites, these sites that gave you e-copies of classics or any work published that was outside of copyright, meaning it had been published over 75 years prior. So I got like an e-copy of The Secret Garden because my sentimental copy was looking pretty battered, and I read the original Dracula and reread Frankenstein, but that kind of doesn't go very far. And I quickly got bored of it, but obviously I had spent $150 on this thing. I gotta get use out of it without having to drop $10 to $15 on a book. And that's when my mother, who had found it before me, told me about BookBub. BookBub is an email subscription service. You sign up with an account and you tell them your preferred age ranges. Do you want fiction or nonfiction, your favorite genres, and then you set the time that you want them to send you the email. And fun fact, mine is the same as it was when I first signed up, 9 a.m. Even though, as we'll talk about it, I literally never look at them anymore. But they will send you emails with daily deals for ebooks. Now, even if you don't go the route I ended up going, you can still get pretty good deals for traditionally published ebooks. For example, I once saw Sawkill Girls on there for like $2.99. Most of the time, they're going to be $3.99 or cheaper, often 99 cents. But for my part, my favorite was the free deals. Now, I did not realize until probably years later that there is a slew of ebooks that are just always free. Like, you can go on Amazon, on the Barnes and Noble store, and like search through their ebook collections by, list by price, go lowest price first, and find just a slew of permanently free ebooks. But I did not know that at this time. Again, e-reading was still considered a new thing that was going to die out. I didn't know a lot of other people that were primarily reading through ebooks, so I was kind of stumbling my way through this. And it's really funny looking back, considering how much I now consider myself a connoisseur of ebooks and indie books, how much I didn't know back then. But BookBub was like my lifeline to getting new books, and for the longest time, literal years, if the daily deal email had a free book in it, I would automatically download it. Part of the reason for that being that, while yes, there are some books that are permanently free, most of the deals through BookBub are time sensitive. Now, they usually will last a couple days, so if you didn't catch that one email in time, you can still go back and get it. But in some cases, they would be like maybe 24 to 48 hours free. And so I got obsessed with, I have to download every single free book that I ever get in any of my preferred genres, even if I'm not like that interested in the premise, just because it's free and I gotta build up a library somehow. Now, you've heard a little bit about this if you've watched any of my discussions on my Lower the TBR challenge, because as I talk about in that challenge, I really did just load up my e-reader libraries with books I was only marginally invested in, and it took me a literal year and a half to finally work my way through that when I finally started working on getting my TBR down. And that was even after like previous rounds of unhauling. I really used this service to just fill it. But there was something that I didn't realize about those free books at the time that would then come to shape my entire reading career and this entire YouTube channel. And that was the free books were usually self-published. Now, as much as BookBub was a help to me in getting a lot of books for next to no money, it's also a pretty big help for a lot of indie authors. I have heard that it can be kind of tricky to get your book accepted for the daily deals, but once that happens, it is guaranteed to be sent out to a ton of new potential readers that probably didn't even know you existed before. Even today, indie books have a reputation of requiring prior knowledge and know-how and being hard to get into. But back then, it was even worse because, again, this was the era in which ebooks as a whole weren't terribly ubiquitous as of yet. And indie books, which, well, yes, they existed before ebooks. It was the invention of ebooks that really propelled them. They were reliant on the spread of ebooks to get word out, but then you can send out random emails and get it put in front of brand new faces that didn't know about you before. Now, there is a psychology behind things that you got for free versus things that you had to spend time or money on. And so I have seen a lot of indie authors that give out books for free, BookBub or otherwise, complaining about how they get so many downloads and so few reviews. And as someone who, again, did that a lot, that's gonna happen always. Giving out free books means that your book is going to be one of many free ebooks on someone's e-reader app, and it's gonna sit there for a really long time. In fact, some of my most beloved series that I got from BookBub, the series that I read the first book off BookBub and then went ahead and bought all of the rest of the books in the 8-book series and read them all and raved about it on my channel. In a lot of cases, they were languishing in my library for literal years, and the only reason I picked them was because there was a readathon I was doing that required a specific prompt, and that's the only reason I picked it. And that happened multiple times where I'm like, oh my god, I love this book. How has this just been sitting in my library for so long and I haven't touched it? Because there were just so many. And again, that became a problem for me for a while, in which my e-reader apps were just overloaded. I actually did re-download the Nook app just because I wanted to see, and looking back, and yep, I still have a ton of old e-copies of books from genres I don't even look at. But yes, it was very helpful for indie authors, but it was also a very big revelation to me because it didn't immediately occur to me to look into those free books any further. But when I started doing things like looking in to see if they were in my library, and they were never in the library, and I would go online in places and I could never see the names of the authors on any of those regular like trad published book club lists, and that's what led me to start digging into it more and going to the Amazon page and looking at the publication data and seeing that the publisher was just the author. And that's when I realized I'm reading indie books, and my hipster brain went ding. And I was like, I can be the indie book girly. I mean, we weren't really using girly back then, but when I realized that I could be the indie book hipster, I was like, yes, let's go. And then when I got into BookTube, I already had a base of indie books that I could rely on to talk about on my channel. Although at the time, indie books were the ignored stepchild of the book world when it came to BookTube. It was still a big part of my channel, and it was because of BookBub that I had that in the first place. Now, by the time I started my BookTube channel in 2018, I had developed an excess income, and I had begun working through some of my nonsense and could spend more money on books. But even then, I was very solidly in the indie book camp. And again, part of that reason is probably because indie books tend to be a lot cheaper than traditionally published ebooks. And, you know, we're growing, but we're not fully there yet. Still get panicky when I see a $12 ebook. But Regardless, I knew when I started my booktube channel that I wanted to focus on indie books. And one of the earliest video series that I knew I wanted to do was the best and worst of indie books, where I would take basically two notable books I had read recently, one for being great, one for being terrible, and compare them side by side. Now, this series is basically defunct on my channel at this point. I'm not opposed to like pulling out a best and worst of occasionally, but at this point, I talk about indie books so much throughout the entirety of my channel that there's not really a point of specifically calling out books for being indie books I've read anymore. Like, if you are watching a Margaret Adele video where I am talking about more than one book, assume one of them is indie, okay? My percentage of indie books read is like never below 80%. But regardless, at the time, I had a fairly significant amount of indie book recs under my belt, but it wasn't as ubiquitous as it was today. So I had the indie books video series, Best and Worst of Indie Books, titled that every time. And that is how Shammy Stovall found me. I had only been on BookTube for a couple months when I got the email. And to tell you how much of a monumental moment that was for me, I don't know if I've ever told you this, Shammy. I know you watch these videos. I can still remember the exact place I was when I read the email from Shammy. It was December. My husband and I were still working at the same school, and we had decided to drive home from work that day. And I was reading the email on my phone in the car on the way home. Like, that's how much I distinctly remember when I got that email. And I was floored that there was an author that wanted me to review their book. I was going to get a free book, and now I have come to understand that no, the free book is not acceptable payment for labor, but I still love reviewing as a hobby, unpaid hobby. But at the time I was like, it was a physical book. You know what? No, I still have it. Star Mark Rising. I still have it. And this is before her notes got longer. Most of her notes in the beginning of the books are now like the entire page, but this just says, "Thank you, Margaret, Shammy Stovall." I remember the first time I got this, I'm like, this is a free book I got for review. This is a free book I got because someone wanted me to review it. I was like, I felt so special. And that was all because of the indie books I had to talk about because of BookBub. I had the indie books because of BookBub that got me that first email. And it was kind of slow going at first, but then I actually ended up getting on the review lists for multiple authors I found through BookBub as well. Things like when I found a book and I didn't know how to pronounce the author's name, and those how to pronounce sites are obnoxiously incorrect. And so I took a wild swing and I messaged them, and I was like, hey, I'm a booktuber. I want to talk about this book, but like, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Can I get a phonetic pronunciation? And they were so floored that this booktuber wanted to talk about their book. They put me on the review list. Or authors that I read on BookBub or from BookBub, and then I went and I found their socials and we connected and I got on their ARC list that way. Like, BookBub not only kickstarted the indie books on my channel to let me realize that this is a thing I could do, but I also found multiple authors for my review list because I found one of their other books on BookBub. And it's wild how much of an effect the butterfly effect can have. I just didn't want to spend a lot of money on ebooks, and things happen, and suddenly I am the person that people will tag in Twitter threads to be like, oh, if you want to know indie books, you check out Margaret. Oh, you need indie book recs, you check out Margaret. Like, it's wild. And lo, we can see where the emotional attachment comes from. Not only was BookBub a great access point for me in the days when I literally could not make my brain be okay with spending any significant amount of money on books, but it also gave me an in to the community that I love being a part of. And yes, despite all the drama and reviewers feeling more and more unsure about reviewing indie books every day, I still love the community, and I have still had so many fantastic interactions, and yes, gotten free swag for reviewing books. And no, my channel is not very big, and I know all the reasons why, and I don't necessarily care to change it. I'm happy with what I have now. But all of that stuff is because I was obsessively using this daily email subscription service for years, for nearly a decade by the time I finally started pulling off. And I was kind of saddened when I realized I probably shouldn't use this as much anymore. But let's get into why I had that thought. While BookBub was so incredibly necessary for me at one point, I have simply outgrown the need for it. I thankfully have a very loving husband who has done a lot of work with me to overcome a lot of my money-based trauma, that I can now spend more money on myself without panicking and without feeling like we're going to be homeless if I buy a $5 coffee. And so I can buy books instead of only needing to download free ones. And I have built up an incredible roster. Let's call it a roster. Yes, if I ever viewed you, you were on my roster of indie authors who are repeatedly sending me their works. And I know, this author is going to be sending me that sequel or that new standalone coming up soon. And that's going to take up reading time, and I have really grown out my tastes over the course of my booktube journey and really started seeking out specific identities and putting together giant lists of books that revolve around neurodivergence and disability in fiction and queer books, and really forcing myself to purposefully seek and purposefully research and go back to authors over and over again so I can develop a sense of their entire writing style. And just in general, I have finally learned the self-discipline to limit what books I'm taking in to make sure I really want them. In January of 2022, I started my Lower the TBR challenge, which I have posted on my channel about a lot. But basically, I was tired of being one of those booktubers that had literally hundreds of unread books. I wanted to get it down to a manageable level. And so that involved a lot of unhauling and being very honest with myself. And one of the things I had to be very honest with myself about is that BookBub tends to give me more duds than diamonds. For me personally, while yes, I do have a short list of authors and books I found out there that I adore, be all end all, I am going to, read their entire series, and authors that I have ended up on the review lists for as a result of BookBub, and I want to keep going with that. For the most part, for every one book I found that I loved, I found 10 books that I didn't, that they were meh or bad. And in general, I'm over needing an email to randomly send me books. I already have so many books that I'm researching and looking into. I don't need any more. I finally got my TBR down to 50 books, 50 owned unread books that I need to work through. I do not want to increase that anytime soon. Now, that does not mean that I have canceled my account. I do, in fact, still get the daily email, and every now and then I'll get curious and I'll check, but nothing really jumps out at me anymore, or at least it doesn't jump out at me enough to take up one of the free slots I have for my Maintain the TBR challenge. Not more than all of the other books I've already been thinking about and looking into. If I do have a slot open on my TBR challenge now, I have specific authors I want to go back to, specific series that I'm working on. So a random list of book deals just doesn't fit in my life anymore. But I can't really bring myself to actually unsubscribe, to actually delete the account, at least not yet, because I do still remember the days when I got genuinely excited for that 9 a.m. daily email to come in to find out what I was going to be reading next. And it genuinely gave me excitement and helped me cultivate indie reading and cultivate reading at all without anxiety over money stuff. Like, I know it feels weird to be getting so sentimental over what is essentially a marketing gimmick, but like it was a big part. It was a big part of my growth and development as a reader, and it's just something I don't need anymore. It's not something that serves my greater reading purposes anymore. But I can't bring myself to give it up totally. Not yet, anyway. Maybe a little more growth for that. So obviously, I would in fact recommend that you try BookBub. Like I mentioned before, those free books are guaranteed to be self-published. So if you are looking to get into indie books, you will have a pretty easy in with that. You will be able to just be given daily indie deals without having to do a lot of research into the community or have any prior knowledge. Granted, I think at this point, well, at one point I did like recommend BookBub as a primary way of getting into indie books. At this point, I would probably more recommend other reviewer sites that have just a ton of free arcs for review that are all indie books. But regardless, it's still a good resource if you're looking to get into indie ebooks. It's a good resource if you want to save money on trad ebooks. Just in general, yes, it exists. Yes, it is real. I don't know if it's accessible to the global south. That one I did not check, Rachel. You'd have to double check me on that one. But regardless, I do still have an emotional attachment to this email subscription service. I do still consider it a very big part of my growth as a reader, but it's just time to put it away. Thank you so much if you watched all of that rambling. Have you ever used BookBub? Is there anything similar that you would consider important to your reader journey? Some website or email service that really helped you along as a reader? I would love to hear about it. Please let me know down in the comments below. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.